SEC predictions circa 2021. Where are we going? Who do we like? Well, the first thing I like to do in these, I don't just like to go record. I do like to talk about some things. The couple of things that I'm watching in the SEC, and I love to read the comments on this because I love to know what you're watching because it lets me know how to guide the show throughout the rest of the year. You got a couple of teams that are just totally fascinating. One of them's Texas A&M, one of them's Georgia. Everyone knows about Bama. They're a household name. But these two, to me, are household names because I've covered the conference for a long time. But nationally, they don't look at Texas A&M and Georgia, rightfully so, the way they look at Alabama. And why is that? Well, they don't have the hardware. Now, I am not a has-to-see-it-to-believe-it guy. I believe both are capable of doing that, but it doesn't matter because all that matters is ultimately that you do it. And so the first question, and to me the biggest question across the conference this year, is will either of those brands, that A&M or that Jeep, will either one of them elevate to Tier 1? I mean, that would be one of the biggest stories in this conference in quite a while. Not a huge upset, but it'd be one of the biggest stories in this conference in quite a while. That's the first thing that I'll watch. The second thing that I think is really going to be fun to watch is some of these new head coaches. You got Josh Heupel at Tennessee. You got Shane Beamer at South Carolina. Brian Harson's already had a really bumpy takeoff, or at least trip down the runway. They're not in the air yet. And now we've got games to play. And you've got a variety of expectations, not wide in range, but a variety of expectations for some of these new head coaches. And I just wonder, because I think the expectation levels are largely in check, how smooth can these takeoffs be? I think Josh Heupel at Tennessee, even if they lose some games this year, I'm going to give you the projected record from the model in just a second. Even if they lose some games, I think Tennessee fans can at least take comfort in knowing if you watch your team lose, it won't be because you went down with a bunch of offensive bullets left in the chamber. At the very least, they're going to be a very, very entertaining offensive product, and you're going to know you fully leveraged your capability offensively. And if you get outscored, you get outscored. If you turn the ball over because you're young and you're inexperienced and you just got a lot of pieces that are kind of being shoehorned in together into a new offensive system, so be it. That's what year one looks like in a lot of cases. That's what I'm thinking and feeling with Tennessee. Again, record prediction to come. South Carolina, the most important thing here to me is not so much a win-loss record. I've done a lot of radio over in South Carolina and the Carolinas in general. Anytime we talk about the Gamecocks, I'm always very quick to say I don't think success is going to be determined by whether Shane Beamer goes 6-6. Okay, we're good. We made a bowl. 4-8. Nope, he's an abject failure. It's a bottom-line business. It's a wins and loss business, and I get it. But if we're trying to be forward-thinking about South Carolina and we understand where the program is right now compared to where you want it to be over there, which I think long-term can be a contender in the East. I don't care what the perception is. The reality is Carolina has the capability of being a contender, not this year, but in the future. Well, if we're trying to get there, you can't afford to lose your recruiting momentum. There's a lot of program momentum built up around South Carolina as a program right now, but that's easy to build in the summer because it's easy to go on the speaking tour if you've got the gift that Shane Beamer has, and you've got that magnetic quality because he is South Carolina. You cut his arm open, doesn't really bleed so much red. It's South Carolina. It's Garnet. It's South Carolina. They know that. They love him. That's why they supported his hire. But then you get into the season, and I'm looking at South Carolina's schedule on the screen right now, and presumably you beat Eastern Illinois. But listen, if you go to East Carolina and you struggle in lieu of having Georgia on deck, and then you obviously eventually get into the meat of the SEC schedule, if you start piling losses up, here's the biggest challenge for Shane Beamer in South Carolina. Can you still make that fan base, and more importantly, can you still make high school coaches, high school recruits, and their parents and their guardians and their families feel the same way about you as they do right now? Because that is going to be the magic ingredient this year. Don't lose the momentum you've built up since you landed on the tarmac in Columbia and you took this job. That would be success in year one. Also, some week-over-week incremental improvement offensively. That'd be nice, too. What about Alabama and Florida? Those two played in the SEC championship game last year. And what I would love to know is how effectively each of them are going to replace some key starters. We've seen Bama do it more so than Florida. I mean, Florida has not been in the coming off a national championship, now we got to reload sort of mold that Alabama frequently finds themselves in. But either way, I mean, there are a lot of expectations for both programs. With Alabama, there is benefit of the doubt given that there is not given at Florida. I'm going to talk about Emory Jones a little bit later in the show, but, I mean, we can talk about it here, too. It's a standalone video. I am very, very curious, because these two play each other in Week 3, what we'll be saying about these offenses by that point. There is an assumption that I have been hesitant to buy into, that this Alabama offense will just be Bama. And week 1 against Miami, they'll pick up right where they left off. No, they won't. They will not. They will probably beat Miami. I'm going to pick them to beat Miami. They will not just pick up where they left off last year. I can assure you of that. There will be some struggle. There'll be some growing pains early on. Ditto for Florida. I think that's a little more expected. But, man, they play week 3. And Florida's got the benefit of one of the most insane home field advantages we will have seen in 24 months in this sport. That's going to be something to watch. Over in Baton Rouge, LSU is a team Florida's going to play later in the year. It's a game that I'm about to talk about in just a second. But at LSU, let me ask you a question. What are your expectations for them? I've had wide ranges of answers for that question from LSU fans. Now, the ones publicly are all 9 wins or better. I've had in my DMs I've had some LSU fans say, now don't tell anyone this, especially Paw Ricky. Don't tell him this. I think 7-5 this year. I don't know, man. I don't like the offensive line situation. I don't know that these running backs are going to step up. Every time I look up, we got 4 new names on the injury chart. So there's a wide range of expectation. Again, I'm going to give you my prediction in just a second. It's hard to nail this team down, though. But what I feel we're going to have is this really, really good idea when we watch them play UCLA. I don't think LSU is going to go to UCLA and beat them 44-14 and then implode later in the year. Conversely, I don't think LSU is going to go to UCLA and stumble to a loss or a narrow win and then just buzzsaw the rest of their schedule. I mean, there's growth that can be had week over week with any team that ends up being good, but I think a lot of the questions that we have not been able to answer for months and months and months, in a lot of cases, will be answered over the span of 4 quarters on a Saturday afternoon next week. Feels so good to say that. So some quick games. I got 3 of them that I circle for every conference to just put up on the wall. This is not an exhaustive list. It's the SEC. Every week you got a couple of them. But again, that Bama at Florida week 3 matchup, we've got a lot of internal struggle right now. We on the Late Kick staff, a.k.a. Director Colin and I, we are very, very much in limbo as to which game we should choose to go to. We're being recruited. I'm actively being recruited in my Twitter DMs by the fan bases here. And there's good arguments. There's no wrong argument. You've got the Auburn at Penn State whiteout, and you got Bama at Florida. And I cannot overstate how incredible the environment's going to be down there in Gainesville. Because whatever you expect about Florida, the point is they probably don't have a loss yet. And no one tells those guys they're supposed to lose to Alabama. And in a lot of cases, you take it upon yourself as a fan to change that dynamic, and they've got the ability to. Trust me, last time I was at Florida, the crowd there changed the trajectory of a game. At that point, it was Auburn in there. You could feel it on the field. Palpable. You could feel it. Incredible. So that one's in week 3. How about a week 6 game? It's Bama again, but this one's on the road at A&M. Now, this is the circle game for the conference this year. A lot of times it's Bama and LSU. Last year it was Bama, Georgia. Finally, Texas A&M has the stature about themselves that they get that home game and they get the national spotlight. Like I said the other night, probably the first time the eyes of the college football nation will be on Texas A&M since the time Dabo and Clemson went in there. And they got pushed. They really got pushed. Didn't win the game that night. A&M didn't win the game that night. So that's one to look forward to. And also, one that I've just got an abnormal amount of fascination about is Florida at LSU. This is a week 7 game. So the week after Bama and A&M, Florida goes to LSU. And the reason, aside from the obvious, why this has such marquee appeal for me is because if Florida's already played Bama, and let's just for argument's sake say they came up short that day, they've got Georgia the week after this game, 2 weeks after this game. And this could be to determine what rides on that game in Jacksonville. And that's just the Florida side of things. You've also got the LSU side of things where if things pan out the way that they expect them to, they're undefeated at this point, and this would be the last remaining major hurdle to being undefeated when they play Alabama, which would be a story in and of itself. So let's talk about some final predictions, and let me explain to you how we go about this. We have our own model, our own proprietary model, the same one we use to pump out the JP poll and the same one we use every week to give you the Ramen Noodle Express picks that you guys swear by. So if we got a record attached to your team's name that you don't like, but this model also made you a lot of money last year, are you going to yell at the model? Are you just going to scoff at the model? What are we going to do with the model? I don't know. But I just want to say, I do want all the credit if these picks go right, with none of the blame if the picks go wrong. So let's take a look at the SEC final record predictions as presented by the model per 1,000 season simulations. There are no undefeated teams in the SEC this year per the model. I agree with that, by the way. I've got Georgia and Bama in the SEC title game. We'll give you the winners of all those games Sunday night. Pay attention to the number 2 spot in the West. If you're listening on podcast, I've got Bama and A&M both going 11-1 this year. I don't know who loses to who there. That's not the way this works, but I'm telling you that equals 2 playoff teams. I am a firm believer if Texas A&M's 11-1, I mean, I would assume obviously the losses to Alabama because Bama won the West, but I think at that point, kind of a replay of last year, but I think 2 years in a row doing that, A&M's got a strong shot to be in the playoff. LSU at 9-3 in the West, 3rd place. Fascinating, because there is a popular train of thought out there that LSU is either going to be a 10-win team or better, or they're just going to implode and be 7-5 or worse. And I understand why it's that way. But again, consider the logic behind this model. It's 1,000 simulations, so very much you're getting sort of the average output of all that, and it lands at 9-3. So you got a healthy amount of both in 1,000 simulations there. Ole Miss, Arkansas, Auburn, and Mississippi State round out the top 7. We are not all that high on the Auburn Tigers, the more intel that we have gotten from fall camp down there. It's not about the COVID stuff either. That doesn't help. Just, I don't know. I think it's going to take a little bit longer for that program to get its legs under it under Brian Harsin than you would want. Now, we've got Florida in 2nd place in the East at 9-3. And then the Missouri Tigers, who we've liked more and more as we put more and more data in that model at 8-4. And 8-4, if you look at Missouri's record, means they're beating a couple of folks you don't think they're supposed to be beating. They do not draw LSU, nor do they draw Alabama out of the SEC West, though. And when they get Texas A&M, it's the week after the Alabama game. Just keep that in mind. Kentucky, very fashionable pick right now. Got them at 7-5. That's a very good year for the Cats. I do have Tennessee making a bowl game at 6-6. And then we got South Carolina 4-8, Vandy 2-10. That is our SEC official, final, stamp it and endorse it predictions for the 2021 season. As always, very excited to see what you have to say in the comments section.